Hello there, it's James here. Today I'm going to walk you through the process of adding routing to a new React project, just like the one I've created here with Create React App. And of course, we're going to use Navi for the project, so let's start by adding some pages. So in a Navi app, pages are usually placed within a pages directory, so we'll start by creating that and then just importing Navi. So to actually add a page, you'll use Navi's create page function, which is really simple. You just pass in the page's title, so we'll call it welcome for the first page. Then you pass in some content. And the content can be anything, but we'll just use some JSX. And because we're using JSX, we'll just need to import React as well. Now, once you have a page, well, you need to actually map it to a URL. And to do that, you'll use Navi's create switch function. So create switch is also really simple. You just pass in a paths object, and the paths object maps paths to pages or redirects or even more switches. But for the moment, let's just map the root path to that page that we've just defined. And that's all there really is to creating a switch. But the thing is, switches just return a plain object. I mean, switches and pages don't actually do much by themselves. To use them, you'll actually need to create a navigation store. So let's export this switch, and we'll use it to create a navigation store in the app's entry point in index.js. So let's import the pages, and then we'll import Navi. And to create that navigation store, we'll use Navi's create browser navigation function, which accepts the pages that we just imported. And that creates a navigation store. So a navigation store, just like a Redux store, has some state. And we can get the current state by calling getCurrentValue. And that returns all of the state, but the part we're interested in is the route property. So let me show you why that is. So I'll put this in a route variable, and I'll just log it to the console. And you'll see that within this route object, it has a title, which is welcome. And it also has some content, which is a JSX element, which is the same JSX element that we defined here. So because it's a JSX element, we can just render it using react.dom.render. So we'll render route.content. There you go. You can see that our content is now rendered to the screen. And if we were to have a look at, say, the about page, well, nothing would be rendered because we haven't defined that yet. So we've created literally a single page app. But that's kind of boring. So let's actually add this about page because, well, as you know, every website needs an about page. So we'll just define another path, and we'll use create page like we did for the first page. Pass in a title and some content. And we'll use JSX for this as well. There we go. Now we can see the content for the about page. And we probably want to have some links between these two pages as well. So let's add a link from the about page to the welcome page. Let's also add a link from the welcome page to the about page. Then if we click between these links, it all just works. So this is a nice and small app. So it's okay for all of our content to be defined in the one file or to be placed into the one bundle using an app that's this small. But say you want to make a bigger app, or your app starts to grow, and there comes a point where you can't just have all of your content in one bundle. You're going to want to pull some of the content from an API, or you might want to split the content into separate bundles and load them dynamically. So Navi actually makes this really easy to do, because in Navi you don't have to just pass your content ahead of time. You can also pass a getContent function. And this function will only be called once the content is needed. So you can see after I've saved the file here, this still works because we can directly return our content from getContent. Oh, sorry, I have to just show you the page. And you can also return a promise from getContent, and that's the really cool thing, because that means that getContent can be an async function, which makes it really easy to work with things like window.fetch or the import statement. So let's actually use this to split out this content here into a separate file, because import, as you know, returns a promise. So we can just do this. Then we'll create a separate about.js file to put the content in. And since we're using JSX, we'll have to import React. And we'll just export the JSX as our default export. And there's a reason we're using the default export, because getContent is smart enough to look for the default property of whatever is returned, just like React.lazy. So it's really simple to use. So let's save this and see what happens. Oh, there's no content. And I mean, it actually kind of makes sense that there's no content, because this import here returns a promise. And getContent, well, it can't be called ahead of time, so it must be called here. And so if we're calling getContent here, the promises content isn't going to be available when we get the route here. And you can confirm that by having a look in this route. Like, you can see the content is undefined, which is why the content here is missing. There's another interesting thing here, which is that this status property has a value of busy. So this is telling us that Navi actually knows that we're waiting for some content here. And you'd expect, I guess, that it would become something else once the content is available. And if we have a look at the welcome page, where the content is available ahead of time, you'll see that its status property has a value of ready. So what we want to do is we want to wait until status is ready before actually rendering our content for the about page. And once status is ready, if we call get current value again, we'll get a different route object which will have status ready and it will have the actual content. So how do we get this next route object? Well, Navi provides two ways to do that. It gives you an easy way, and it gives you a kind of more flexible way. So for this example, I'm going to use the easy way, but I do just want to show you the flexible way briefly. So that's this method called navigation.subscribe. And so how this works is, if you pass this method a function, then this function will be called every time that the navigation state changes. So you can see how this works just by logging the route property of the navigation state. And you'll see that on the about page, well, we're still logging the route from earlier, but we're also now logging a second route. And we have a look in here, well, this actually has some content, which is a JSX element. And it also has the status as ready. So as you could actually call react.render from within here, but that gets a little bit fiddly, and Navi provides a much easier way to get the subsequent route objects, and that's the Navi Provider component. So if you've used Redux or Apollo before, then you're probably familiar with provider components. If not, then they're really simple. All they do is they make some data available to the components that they're wrapped around. And because you have to wrap them around the components that are going to use that data, well, the place to put them is the very top of the application. So let's just pass our navigation object into the app component. And we'll put a nav provider at the very top of the app component. So let's open up app.js. And we'll have to first import nav provider. So all of Navi's components are exported from React Navi, so we'll import it from there. Then let's just replace all of this. We'll pass in the navigation object that we passed in via props. And there we go. If we save this file, I mean, nothing is rendered because Navi Provider doesn't do anything by itself. It just subscribes to the navigation state and provides it to any components that are inside of it. And since we haven't got any components inside, nothing happens. But we can import the navRoute component. And if we pop that inside, the way that you use navRoute is you pass in a render prop, and that receives the latest route. And then you can just return the content that you want to be rendered for each route. So since our content is just a React element, we can just return it. And then we go. Nice and simple. In fact, with navRoute, it actually, if you don't pass in a render prop, then it has a default renderer which knows how to deal with React elements and React components. So since all of our content is just React elements, we can remove this render prop and just pass in a navRoute by itself and it'll work fine. And this is actually really good because if we don't pass in the render prop, this will actually deal with React components as well as React elements. And if we take a look in our about.js file, this is kind of weird. I mean, it's not usual that you'll export a React element by itself. It would be a lot more typical to export a component like this. So now that we've using navRoute and we're not providing a render prop for it, we can just export a component here and it's still going to work, as you can see there. So this is all working really nice. There's just one problem with it at the moment. So if we click one of these links, the whole app is reloaded every time. And this isn't very good, because apart from the fact that all of the app's state gets blown up with every navigation, it also makes it impossible to build something that feels nice and fast. So to fix this, we're going to need to use history.pushState. And with Navi, you don't actually do that directly. You import the navlink component and you use it instead of the normal A component. So let's import navlink here. I'll import that from React Navi, and we'll just replace the A tag with navlink because it's a drop-in replacement. It accepts a href prop. And let's do the same thing for our about page. There we go. So now if we click here, you'll see it reloads instantly. It's a lot faster, it's a lot smoother, it's very nice. And there's actually another benefit to using navlink, because the thing is that navlink will warn you if you are trying to link to a page which doesn't exist. So I'm going to demonstrate this. I'm going to actually create a navbar which has links to all of this website's pages. So let's just start by adding navlink to our app component. And let's just move all of our links to it one at a time. So start with this one. And while I'm doing this, I just want to mention that that nav route doesn't have to be directly on the Navi Provider. It can be anywhere under Navi Provider, including inside a div or something, but we don't need to do that right now. So let's just move this about component as well. So we have welcome, we have about. These links work as you'd expect. Let's add another one. Let's add a contact page. Because again, every website needs a contact page, just like an about page. And you'll see now that we've got this message in the console. A nav link referred to href contact, but the router could not find this path. And this is one of the big advantages of using Navi, is that your pages are just an object. So Navi can look through that object and it can figure out which URLs are available to your app without doing much work. And this is how it finds that the contact URL doesn't exist, and it's also how it implements static rendering. So I'll touch a little bit more on that later, but for the moment, let's just click this link and see what happens. Oh dear, there's an error. And if we have a look here, you'll see that there's an error overlay that's produced by Create React App. And you'll see that the error that's produced is a not found error. It says URL not found /contact, and I mean that kind of makes sense, really. I mean, the URL isn't found. But the interesting thing is the interesting question is to ask, where is this error coming from? So let me just go back to the entry point and let's just log that route object again to see what's inside of it. So if we do navigation.getCurrentValue.route, you'll see that the route status is actually error. And it has this error property with an error inside of it, which is the error that's appearing here. Of course, the error isn't actually being thrown within create browser navigation, because otherwise this console log would never be called. So where is the error being thrown? Well, this nav route here, what it does is when it sees that there's no content and there is an error and the status is error, it throws the error. And that's where that error is coming from, and that's why it's appearing here. So we can actually handle that error by using an error boundary, or by using React's component did catch lifecycle method. And doing that yourself is a little bit fiddly. So Navi actually provides a helper to do that for you, which is the nav not found boundary component. So let's add that in here. So we'll just add nav not found boundary. And the way you use this is you just wrap it around your nav route. And then whenever you have a nav route with an error, this will catch it and it will call its render prop to decide what to render. So we can just return a message from the render prop using JSX. And if we save this, you'll see that the error overlay still pops up, because Create React App will always show that error overlay, even if the error is properly caught and handled. But we can just close this and you'll see that the not found message is there. And don't worry, the error overlay doesn't actually appear in production. So this all works very nicely. But I mean, the thing is, we probably don't actually want to have a not found error here. We want to have a contact page. So let's actually add that contact page. So again, it's just the same process as before. We add a /contact path, and we map that to a page object with a title and some content. Actually, let's use a getContent function again here. So we can just return some JSX from there. And it's all going to work as you'd expect. But say that for some reason the contact page actually needs to fetch some data from a really slow API. So maybe you're using an external service to implement your contact page or something like that. So let's actually simulate this and see how it works. So to do that, we can use an async function, because that will always return a promise. And then we can just a way to set timeout. That takes a second. We go. So this will make it wait a second before the content is returned. And you can see if we refresh the page, then the nav bar will pop up immediately, and then the route will wait until the content is available before actually returning it. And so if we click on About and then click back into Contact, you can see that the About page actually stays there until the contact is available. And the reason that this works is that this the nav route component is a little bit clever. Like, it will always wait until the next content is ready before calling the render prop with a new route object. Or in this case, we haven't provided a render prop, but it has a default one. So it'll always wait until the next content is there before it re-renders the content. And this is one of the best parts of Navi, because it makes working with async content really easy. You don't have to worry about component state or a Redux store or loading spinners or anything. You just provide an async function and it works. Of course, if you do have a 1 second wait between clicking a link like this one and the content appearing, I mean, that's going to be a little bit confusing for some users. So it's better to keep them in the loop. And well, we want to let them know that something is happening. So there's actually a really easy way to do that too, which is the Navi Loading component. So let's import that. And the way that Navi Loading works is it's a little bit like nav not found boundary. You just wrap it around your route, and you pass in a render prop, which receives the loading status as a boolean. So let's just copy this in here. And this is loading will be true if nav route is loading the next content, or it'll be false otherwise. So you can visualize that however you'd like. You can do something dumb like this. And this is going to display this text. Or not. Right, sorry. So you can just pass, you can add some text while it's loading if you want. There we go. But this isn't very nice. So there's actually a much easier way to do it, which is to use the React busy indicator package. So let's just import busy indicator from React busy indicator and get the spelling right. So I've added this to my package JSON earlier on, so it's easy to just pop it in here for you. And this takes in is busy prop. So we can just pass in is loading as the busy prop, and it's just going to work. It'll give you a nice loading bar at the top with an animation. And it has a bit of a delay. So you might have seen earlier when I clicked about, it showed for a brief moment that horrible loading string, because the about function, if you remember, or the about page also has async content, and so it's not going to be available immediately. But having this delay, which is configurable, by the way, if we set the delay to 20 milliseconds, then it's going to wait 20 milliseconds before it displays this loading spinner or loading bar, so that it doesn't appear for loading pages with really short loading times. So this is all very nice. It's a nice base to build on. And I think actually Navi lets you do a lot more than what I've covered in this video. So it also lets you handle authentication by having a route behave differently based on whether the user is logged in or not. So you can have guest users be presented with a redirect, while logged in users are see the actual content. Or another thing that it lets you do is that it lets you automatically generate tables of contents and navbars. So if you have a look at the Navi website, we have this navbar which is generated from the pages directory. It's all automatic. I don't have to manually update this. And Navi actually uses that same functionality, the build a map of all the URLs, to perform static rendering. So unlike static rendering tools based on headless browsers like React Snap, for example, Navi actually knows about every URL on your site. So even for URLs that don't have any links pointing to them, and even for URLs that are behind a paywall, Navi can still generate HTML for those pages. So that's one of the really good things about Navi. And I'm not going to cover static rendering or authentication in this video, but there are some guides in the documentation for both of these. You can see them here: static rendering and authenticated routes. And in fact, there's one more guide which I really recommend having a look at, which is Create React Navi App. So Create React Navi App is a tool that's actually built around Create React App, but it starts you off with a project that looks a lot like the one we've just built. So it helps you to avoid rewriting all this, and it also has static rendering set up for you out of the box. So I definitely recommend giving it a try. But otherwise, that's about it. So I hope this video has given you a bit of a taste of just how simple Navi can make working with async content. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoy using Navi as much as I enjoyed building it.